want to thank the Bay Area Council for bringing us together and allowing us to share with business leaders and other political leaders to discuss the insights that really give us an opportunity to face the challenges that we have and overcome them. I'm now honored to introduce President Bill Clinton. I met, at that time, Bill, before President, in Cupertino in 1990. And he was just thinking of running for president, and he was looking for a Northern California finance chair. The previous cycle, I was the finance chair for Michael Dukakis. And even though the campaign didn't work as well as it should have, the finance operation was fabulous. So he somehow found me out, and we were in a restaurant. I'm trying to think if it was a sports bar in Cupertino, as a matter of fact. And we sat there for lunch for literally 2.5 hours, and his charm is extraordinary, intellect's extraordinary, persuasiveness is extraordinary, as we all know. And his likability is even more, you just can't say no to him. And I thought to myself, okay, how many friends do I have left with any money that could give to a governor of Arkansas? And I had to be honest, because I can't say things that I can't do. And I was regretful, but I told him I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And so that was the beginning of really a wonderful friendship, and we've been friends ever since. And I was smart to do what I did, and the rest is history, as you all well know. As you all well know. Bill Clinton was elected president in 1992. He became the 42nd chief executive. He was elected again in 96, and he was the first, which I didn't even know, the first Democratic president in 6 decades to be elected a second term. Under his leadership, the country enjoyed the strongest economy in a generation and the longest peacetime economic expansion in U.S. history, and the creation of, listen to this, 22 million jobs. 22 million jobs. That is going to be in the Q&A, I guarantee you, I guarantee you. And we had federal budget surpluses, the first time since 1960. If 8 extraordinary years as a president was remarkable, it's remarkable what he has been doing ever since then. He has founded the William Jefferson Clinton Foundation, and he's focused on remarkably challenging things. Improving global health, just imagine, only he would take something like that on. Strengthening the economies, promoting healthier childhoods, and protecting the environment. Today, the foundation staff and his volunteers work all over the world to improve the lives of so many people. The Clinton Health Access Initiative, which is helping more than 4 million people living with HIV/AIDS access to life-saving drugs. Established in 1905, the Clinton Global Initiative, of which I am, and I have been a member since that time, brings together global leaders to devise and implement solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. In addition to this work, President Clinton, as you probably have seen many times on television, has joined with President H.W. Bush to raise money for recovery efforts to Hurricane Katrina, the tsunami in 2004, Hurricane Ike in 2008, and tirelessly trying to rebuild Haiti. Remarkable, remarkable achievements. I'm extraordinarily honored and pleased to welcome my friend, President William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was a good example of Clinton's third law of politics, which is whenever possible, be introduced by someone you have either appointed to a high office or who has invested in your career. They will overstate your virtues and underemphasize your flaws. Thank you, George, for everything, and thanks for your support of the Clinton Global Initiative. I'll say more about that in a minute. I got here and I was downstairs, but I heard the end of Jerry Brown's speech, and, you know, we've been friends a very long time, since we were both governors in the late 1970s. And I know what he's going through out here, and maybe George will want to ask me some questions about it. And I said, "How you doing, Jerry?" He said, "This is tough." I said, "Yeah, but I think you're doing the right thing. You know, you don't have a printing press. You have to live by the laws of economics and the money you got. But the dilemmas that the governor and the legislature and soon the people who will vote on proposed budgetary changes are facing are actually a microcosm, and a very big microcosm, of what the country faces, and indeed what people are facing throughout the world." So I want to thank Jim Wunderman and the Bay Area Council for inviting me here. And because California is grappling with all these things, I'm going to do something a little different from what I normally do. You both saw a film, and you heard George talk a little bit about what I do now in my current life. So what I'm going to try to do is relate what I attempt to do today with how I think we should be facing the challenges before us. And in my opening remarks, I try to give you a kind of an outline of where this global economic challenge fits within how I think the 21st century is unfolding. I'm glad to be back here. I've got a lot of friends in this audience. I was thinking when George talked about when he first met me, one of the people here, Martha Whetstone, she was one of two women from Arkansas that organized my campaign in Northern California, and they spent half their time trying to convince voters that Arkansas was in fact a part of the Union and I was eligible to run for president. I know just how Barack Obama felt when they said he wasn't born in America. That's what a lot of people thought about me. But anyway, here we are. I also want to thank the council for one thing that was very important to me. You know, there's hardly any organization like this in the country that's been around since the 1940s, pushing for both economic development and environmental preservation. And you can be proud of that. But I'm particularly grateful that you sponsored the Women and the Economy Summit that the Asian Pacific Economic Council had, and that Hillary was the keynote speaker. And I talked to her a few minutes before I came in. It was about 5:30 in the morning in China. She still hasn't resolved the things you've been reading about, but she's working at it. And I can't really comment on it. You know, usually the great thing about being a former president is you can say whatever the heck you want. The sad thing is, nobody cares what you say. I got the worst of both worlds. If your wife is Secretary of State, nobody really cares what you say unless you screw up, and then they can use it to beat her over the head with. So I have to be very careful what I say. But suffice it to say, she remembered her trip here fondly, asked to be remembered to you, and wondered, I think, ever so briefly, whether it would be better if she were here giving this speech and I were trying to unravel that knot. And I assured her she was far better at it than I ever would have been. But here's what I'd like to say that I hope is relevant. I think whenever you're in a tight, or when you're just in a time when you think things are going pretty well, but you feel like you're losing your direction, you have to ask yourself a set of questions. Number one, where are we? Number two, where do we want to go? Number three, how are we going to get there? Number four, who's supposed to do it? And it is tempting to fall into the trap that governed most of the life I saw in the 30-something years I was in politics, where people asked two questions: what are you going to do, and how much money are you going to spend on it? Or now, where are you going to cut, and how much are you going to cut? But in any case, there is a third question that I believe will be the most important question of the 21st century. That is, however much money you have or don't have, and whatever you propose to do, put into education, cut taxes, whatever, how do you propose to do it? So that you turn your good intentions into real changes in other people's lives. And my whole life is obsessed with this how question. It was a lot when I was president. That's why you may remember that the press often made fun of me for long, detailed budget meetings. Turned out they worked out pretty well for us, but I think the details matter. And I think how we do what we set out to do matters profoundly. So when I started sort of doing the things that you heard about today, I kept asking myself, how can I deal with the challenges of the 21st century? And I believe this is the most interdependent age in human history, and Northern California had a lot to do, Silicon Valley, with making it so. Because before World War I, the rich countries in the world were actually, as a percent of their GDP, slightly more trade dependent than they are today. But there was nowhere near this amount of travel and communication and shared, instantaneous sharing of culture and common scientific research, which after all was the original purpose of the internet. When I became president, there were only 50 sites on the World Wide Web. More than that have been added since I started talking. It was the private province of research physicists. And we didn't have email, so because I wanted 50 of my friends to make sure I never lost touch with how mad people would get at me from time to time when I was president, I actually had to give them a special zip code so that the mail would always get through and the mass of things coming in to the White House. So here we are, interdependent. But interdependence can be good, bad, or both. It just means divorce is not an option. It means no matter how many borders you build, no matter how much they may look like walls, they're actually more like nets. So if that's the nature of the modern world, it is obvious that everybody's job in some form or fashion is to build up the positive forces of our interdependence and reduce the negative ones. So I spent all my time as president trying to build a modern economy that would produce broad-based prosperity and lay the foundation for long-term prosperity, and to build new networks of cooperation with Asia, with Latin America, and with Europe, starting new organizations, reviving old ones, dealing with thorny problems like Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Kosovo, the Middle East, Haiti, you name it. And we didn't always succeed in the details, but the enterprise succeeded. The enterprise succeeded. We had broad-based prosperity and a proven trajectory that would work, and America had a world of more partners and fewer adversaries. I still basically think that's what we got to do. The three big problems the modern world presents, which are submerged in the current crisis but are important, are number one, a profound inequality in access to employment, education, and health care. And that limits the ability of the free enterprise system to generate broad-based prosperity. It imposes circles around it. The second is a lot of instability in a system that requires some instability to function. That is, the capitalist system itself is inherently unstable. That's why you need venture capitalists. They're venturing without a guarantee of success. That's what makes market competition grow. If there were no instability in our system, it would be stable, stultifying, and ultimately static. But if there is too much instability in a system, witness the financial crisis, then people get insecure and they don't take any risk anyway, and the whole thing shuts down. So the trick is in finance, in balancing national security versus the need for high levels of mobility and information and people and technology, you have to deal with managing instability and make good judgments. And the market won't cure it all. Witness the mortgage meltdown and the financial crisis in a market that was almost totally unregulated in terms of capital requirements necessary to offset risk. The third problem we have is that the current model is unsustainable because of the way we consume and produce energy and other natural resources, and that the strains on this market, this model, barring some dramatic change in what we're doing, will become greater as we go from 7 billion to 9 billion people by mid-century. So I spend most of my life trying to figure out how to deal with that, somewhat in America, but usually in Africa, in the poor countries of East Asia, in the poorest parts of Latin America with displaced populations. And here's what I learned about it. Meeting these challenges is very different in a poor country and a rich one. And sometimes, therefore, mind-numbingly complex in a rising country like China, India, or Brazil. In poor countries, they need what you're taking for granted right now. Systems that have predictable, positive consequences for responsible behavior. I mean, just think. You'd be surprised if the lights went dark, the microphone failed, the air conditioning went on the blink, and all this hot air I'm putting out made you uncomfortable. If you get bored with my speech, you can go out and get a drink of water or go to the restroom. I spent a lot of my life in places where people can't take any of that for granted. For example, in a stunning metaphor of the challenges he faced, when the new president of Haiti was giving his inaugural address, the microphone failed. And by the way, I think they're going to do very well. Compared to their history, they got the first chance they've had in my lifetime to escape a lot of their past. But they have to build systems. Every one of us has a different story about how we got into this auditorium tonight. And a lot of you had to overcome more obstacles than others. But none of you got here entirely on your own. You had a school, a mentor, somebody who gave you your first job, somebody gave you your first loan. Things happened. You were in an environment where if you did the right thing, there would be predictable, positive consequences. My friend Bob Strauss, who's still alive and kicking at 93, the sagest politician I ever knew, said, the one thing every candidate wants to make voters believe is that he was born in a log cabin he built himself. And he said, but it ain't so. And so, you know, I had a few problems in my life, but I had incredible luck. I had fabulous teachers. I had a mother who made me believe that I could do anything I wanted to do. And I just had a lot of breaks. I had friends to die for, and I still see them all the time. People that I grew up with. I was at a charity dinner for a friend of mine in Washington the other night, and there were in that crowd in Washington, D.C., 4 people who were friends when we were seniors in high school in Arkansas. Still sticking together, still working together, still doing things together. Our lives had taken very different turns, but we knew, every one of us, that we had been very lucky. So, we have to build systems. So we do things in Africa that double, triple, quadruple farm income. We help Afro-Colombian women who've been blown out of their homes by narco-traffickers' violence to begin again and to make a living. We bring life-saving AIDS medicine to 4 million people, about half the people on earth who get it, and the other half get it a lot cheaper because of what we did to drive the price down. And we're trying to build systems that will enable us to turn the tide on childhood obesity in 14,000 schools, with school meals that go to tens of millions of kids with less bad elements in them and more nutritious elements. And lots of other things like that, helping build systems. Now, in rich countries, by and large, we have systems, that's how we got rich. But in all civilizations since the Sumerians, you can go back 8,000 years, if you have a certain amount of success, what always happens is the systems tend to get a little ossified, and the people running them and those in dominant positions within them tend to become more interested in holding on to present gains than creating a better future, more interested in maintaining their position than advancing the purpose for which the institutions were established. And they begin to think they can cut corners to claim more for the present than to set aside a little to make sure there is a future. And you have the mortgage collapse, or something else in some other time and some other way. And so what we have to do is to reform our systems. Now, in America, I think, and maybe we'll talk more about this, we have to reform our education, our higher education, our energy, our health care, our finance, our government budgeting systems. We got to get ready for the retirement of the baby boomers, and then imagine how long we have to do certain things till we're on the other side of that divide. I'm the oldest of the baby boomers. I hate to think about the other side of that divide, but that's a delicate way of saying when we have lived our lives and we're out of the way, the demographic imbalance will begin to right itself again. So we have to do that. And if you're China, India, or Brazil in different ways, you're grappling with both things. You have well-established systems that have produced a lot of wealth but still need reform, and you've still got a ton of poor people, and you got to provide for them, and you got to figure out how to do both things at the same time. So that's the job. Here's what I'd like to say about it. In the world in which we lived, what works best is people relentlessly devoted to answering the how question. Therefore, ideology and divisiveness is very successful sometimes in politics, often just by driving the vote down rather than by winning a majority to people who might otherwise like to vote. But it doesn't work in real life. What works in real life are creative networks of cooperation. Look at the places in America that are back. Look at the prosperity centers, Silicon Valley. What is it besides a creative network of cooperation? Great universities, great entrepreneurs, lots of venture capital, a kind of a combustible mix of one idea after another. Orlando, how'd they get 100 computer simulation companies in Orlando? An unbelievable cooperation between the Defense Department and NASA, who spend $5 billion on simulation there a year, because it's cheaper for you and safer for them to train people to drive tanks, fly jets, and take spaceships into the atmosphere on simulators than on the real things. Who else needs it? Disney World and the Universal theme park. Obviously, more people come if what they do is more interesting. And the video game division of Global Entertainment Arts, because those of us who get hooked on those fool things realize that every year you need a new jolt of computer simulation to maintain us in the dependency of attention deficit disorder that video games invoke, right? So they're all working together. And guess what? They got America's biggest unknown university there, the University of Central Florida, 53,000 undergraduates, churning out new ideas and licensing them to the simulators, and also training people, changing the curriculum. But I could give you lots of other examples. The Cleveland Clinic, with the local community college, is one of the best healthcare institutions in the world, and they have taken on the toughest nut of our unemployment problem, non-college educated, middle-aged people. No matter what they did for a living, they're training them for jobs that will be available in healthcare with the retirement of the baby boomers, no matter what happens to healthcare reform. And I forgot your neighbors down in San Diego, which now has the largest number of Nobel Prize winning scientists of any city in America, because it's the human genome capital of the world, really, in research, because of Craig Venter's foundation, the university networks there, Qualcomm, and 700 other computer companies need lots of computing power to do genome research. No one can see a genome. And so what works in America is cooperation, creative networks of cooperation. Technology's back in Massachusetts, even though it's a high-cost state, partly because MIT has the best idea transfer system of any university in America, I think. You know, since 1980, if a university comes up with an idea that has commercial resonance, developed by federal research money, they can license it to the private sector and keep the profits for further research. MIT never charges, so that they lower the barrier to entry of a new business, and if their idea turns out not to be as good as everybody thinks, you haven't lost a thing. But if it turns out to be a gold mine, they get to ride up with you. And it's working. But the point is, cooperation works in real life, conflict works in politics. We're never going to get the level of reform we need till we pull together. Nobody's right all the time, and a broken clock's right twice a day. And everybody in this room and everybody outside this room, we poor mortals are condemned to spend our life between those two poles. We'll almost always be right more than twice a day, and we're never right all the time. Therefore, compromise is not a dirty word. Cooperation will work. There is wisdom in crowds, and we've got to find a way to bring our politics and our policy making more closely in line, because we have all these systems to reform. I think increasingly foundations and non-governmental groups like this one has a role to play. You're playing a role today just by bringing me here. You play a role every time you bring a speaker here, every time people get together and discuss a problem. You play a role. One of the reasons I'm very high on Brazil's future is I do a lot of work in Brazil on urban transportation systems and other energy things mostly. But I've been down there twice in the last couple of years to discuss their dueling environmentalisms. This will be the 5th year in a row when they produce more cane ethanol, use more cane ethanol in their cars than gasoline. And it's very efficient. You get over 9 gallons of ethanol for 1 gallon of oil required to produce it. But it's forcing people into the rainforest, not who grow sugarcane, they need the deep topsoil, but they forced the cattle and the soybean farmers into the rainforest. They wanted to know how they could stop it. And they're all sitting down together, all the different interests talking. Last year I went to Manaus on the edge of the rainforest. Every utility, every oil company, every big industry, all the business organizations, the head of the Green Party, the head of the people who favor more solar and wind, the head of the group representing the native tribes of Brazil, which will be destroyed if they build more hydroelectric dams in Brazil to get more clean electricity. They're all sitting there, and instead of a food fight like we see so often in Washington, they're actually sitting around tables saying, you know, these are really hard problems. There are no perfect solutions. We're all going to have to take responsibility and do these things together. And sometimes how you go about a problem dictates whether you ever get to the best available answer. So that's what I want you to think about. America needs to be in the reform business. There are a lot of places where we're not competitive. If If you want to talk more about it in detail and George asks the questions, I'll say so. But don't forget this. We still got the biggest economy in the world. We have the 6th highest per capita income in the world. Our workforce is younger than Japan's or Europe's, and within 20 years will be younger than China. We have enormous capacity to export, and more good jobs are involved in the international markets. It's easier to start a business here than most places. It's still the center of R&D, increasingly because of private as opposed to public investment, because we no longer rank first in the incentives we offer for R&D. But we got all these advantages, and we're from everywhere. And that's going to be a huge advantage in an interdependent world. So it's a big mistake to bet against America. California will come roaring back, but it will happen faster if we work together instead of scream at each other. Thank you very much.